Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of 2 Chronicles, the 36th chapter, being the last chapter in the book of 2 Chronicles, covering the time, really the latter end of the kingdom of Judah, right, leading up until the destruction of the wall and the temple by Nebuchadnezzar, all right, and covering a little bit of the Persians, right, i.e. Cyrus. So this is the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 36. At this point, Josiah is dead, right? They mourn for him as he intervened, trying to battle with Pharaoh Necho on his way to Carchemish, right, to help the Assyrians. So now, after all that, 2 Chronicles 36 and 1, then the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and made him king in his father's stead in Jerusalem. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. And we'll find out why he reigned for only 3 months. And the king of Egypt put him down at Jerusalem and condemned the land in 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. Now, if we look up here, Jehoahaz, king of Judah, there we go. This is the account here. So it says here, after the failed siege of Haran, Necho left a sizable force behind, but returned himself to Egypt. On his march, and actually we can just look up here, Pharaoh Necho II. So he went up to battle at Carchemish. Let's actually look up here and see under military campaigns. Let's see if there's the part in here about Carchemish. Yeah, here we go. All right, so let's take a look here. It says here, back up. All right, let's see. Okay, here we go. So we have here, actually it goes up a little bit more. Yeah, let's deal with the first campaign. So in the spring of 609 BC, Necho personally led a sizable force to help the Assyrians. We read this in the previous chapter. At the head of a large army consisting mainly of his mercenaries, Necho took the coast route via Maris, which is the way of the sea, into Syria. And that's the border, right? If you type here, via Maris, map. Here you go. So it's the way of the sea because it's on the coast, right? The border of the Mediterranean there on the left. So he took that to try and get to Syria. Of course, he was met by Josiah. So as it says here, and proceeded through the low tracts of Philistia, into Syria, supported by his Mediterranean fleet along the shore, and proceeded through the low tracts of Philistia and Sharon. At Megiddo, according to 2 Kings 23, he engaged the Judean king Josiah and had the Judean king killed. An alternative version in 2 Chronicles 35 of a battle at Megiddo also exists, and that's what we read. Herodotus reports the campaign of Pharaoh in his Histories, Book 2, 159. Necho then stopped work on the canal and turned to war. Some of his triremes were constructed by the Northern Sea, and some in the Arabian Gulf, or the Red Sea. By the coast of the Sea of Erythraeus, or Erythraeus, the windlasses for beaching the ships can still be seen. He deployed these ships as needed, while also engaged in a pitched battle at Magdalos with the Syrians and conquered them. And after this, he took Cadatis or Kadesh, which is a great city of Syria. He sent the clothes he had worn in these battles to the branchidae of Miletus and dedicated them to Apollo. Necho soon captured Kadesh on the Orontes and moved forward. So this is after he defeated Josiah. Joining forces with Ashur-uballit, right, the Assyrian king, and together they crossed the Euphrates and laid siege to Haran. Although Necho became the first pharaoh to cross the Euphrates since Thutmose III, he failed to capture Haran and retreated back to northern Syria. At this point, Ashur-uballit vanished from history, and the Assyrian Empire was conquered by the Babylonians, leaving a sizable force behind. So Necho went up there to help the Assyrians. They attempted to retake Haran, but they failed. And at this point, the Assyrian Empire was cooked. So what happens here? Necho left a sizable force right behind. Necho returned to Egypt. On his return march, he found that the Judeans had selected Jehoahaz to succeed his father Josiah, whom Necho deposed and replaced with Jehoiakim. He brought Jehoahaz back to Egypt as his prisoner, where Jehoahaz ended his days. So what we're reading of here in 2 Chronicles, the 36th chapter is is precisely that, right? After the reason that Jehoahaz reigned for only 3 months was because after they set him up as king, on Necho's failed siege on his return back, he ended up saying, nah, I'm taking him with me and I'm setting up somebody new. And that's what we see here in verse 3. And the king of Egypt put him down at Jerusalem and condemned the land in 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. So now that Judea was paying tribute to Egypt. And the king of Egypt made Eliakim, his brother, king over Judah and Jerusalem, and turned his name to Jehoiakim. And Necho took Jehoahaz his brother and carried him to Egypt. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord Yahweh, his God. And I believe it was during his reign, you'll see him mentioned in the book of Jeremiah. Against him came up Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and bound him in fetters to carry him to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar also carried of the vessels of the house of the Lord Yahweh to Babylon and put them in his temple at Babylon. So at this point, this is the first time that if we look up here, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, we'll see here, let's go into the history, right, rise of Nebuchadnezzar II. And let's see. All right, I think, yep, here we go. So as it says here, Shin Sharish Kunz, and this is under what? Foundation and fall of Assyria. Yeah. So Shin Shirishkun's successor, Ashur-uballit II, the final king of Assyria, was defeated at Haran in 609 BC. And that's what you read. Egypt, Assyria's ally, continued the war against Babylon for a few years before being decisively defeated by Nabopolassar's crown prince, Nebuchadnezzar, at Carchemish in 605 BC. Nebuchadnezzar succeeded Nabopolassar in 605 upon the death of his father. The empire he inherited was among the most powerful of the world, and he quickly reinforced his father's alliance with the Medes by marrying Cyaxares' daughter or granddaughter, Amytis. Some sources suggest that the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, were built by Nebuchadnezzar for his wife to remind her of her homeland, though the existence of these gardens is debated. Now let's go down a bit. There we go. Nebuchadnezzar's most famous campaigns today are his wars in the Levant. These campaigns began relatively early in his reign and were chiefly conducted to consolidate his empire by incorporating the newly independent kingdoms and city-states, which had been vassals of the defeated Neo-Assyrian Empire. So basically, after he came up into power, all the the provinces, you could say, that the Assyrians had control over, he resubjugated under the Babylonians, and that included Israel. His 587 BC destruction of Jerusalem ended the kingdom of Judah and scattered its populace, with many of its elite citizens taken as prisoners to Babylon, initiating a period known as the Babylonian captivity. Now, Nebuchadnezzar's first interaction with Israel was not where he destroyed them. Okay, it was you had a couple of exiles, right, where he would, for I think one of the first go arounds was when he ended up taking Daniel and the three holy children and the nobility and so on and so forth captive into Babylon. And so there were a couple of those exiles, one of which included Ezekiel and Jehoiakim, the son of this Jehoiakim, before when he set up Zedekiah. Upon Zedekiah's rebellion, he ends up coming or sending his forces back to this time besiege Jerusalem and destroy it. So, so in here, right, as it says in verse 6, Nebuchadnezzar came up against Jehoiakim, right, and bound him and took him to Babylon. You know, in terms of like secular history on Jehoiakim, some say that he died in that point when Nebuchadnezzar came, but there's not really much information about what happened to him afterwards. Nebuchadnezzar also carried of the vessels of the house of the Lord Yahweh to Babylon and put them in his temple at Babylon. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and his abominations which he did, and that which was found in him, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. And Jehoiakim, his son, reigned in his stead. And he was also taken captive to Babylon after some time. Jehoiakim was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord Yahweh. And when the year was expired, King Nebuchadnezzar sent and brought him to Babylon with the goodly vessels of the house of the Lord, i.e. the temple, and made Zedekiah his brother king over Judah and Jerusalem. Okay, so at this point, Jehoiakim has been taken. Jehoiakim, his son, was taken, and Zedekiah, his brother, was, also, well, and he wasn't taken, but he was set up as a puppet king, a vassal ruler under the Babylonians, and him being the last, quote unquote, king, right, of the kingdom of Judah before what we're about to read here. Zedekiah was 120 years old when he began to reign, and I believe his actual birth name was Mattaniah, and it was then changed to Zedekiah. When he began to reign and reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord Yahweh his God, and humbled not himself before Jeremiah the prophet, speaking from the mouth of the Lord. And when we get to the book of Jeremiah, you'll see the actual interactions between Jeremiah and these various kings here, and how up until Zedekiah's time, he was just going back and forth, basically flipping between one second he'll listen to Jeremiah, the other second he'll come back and say, nah, we're not going to do that. And long story short, due to his disobedience, he ends up, well, let's read what happens. Verse 13. And he also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him swear by God, but he stiffened his neck and hardened his heart from turning unto the Lord God of Israel. So Jeremiah at the time was telling them, hey, the Most High raised up these Babylonians for a reason. Submit yourselves to them and you'll be fine. They didn't. And instead, Zedekiah entered into an agreement with Pharaoh of Egypt to rebel against the Babylonians. And as we know, that didn't end too well for them. Verse 14, moreover, all the chief of the priests and the people transgressed very much after all the abominations of the heathen, and polluted the house of the Lord, which he had hallowed in Jerusalem. And when you read in the book of Ezekiel, right, as we went through, I believe about the first 8 to like 12 chapters, they go into a lot of examples as to why the Lord brought this destruction, right? They expound a bit more on verse 14, in which, as the reader, you get to see the things that the Lord showed Ezekiel. Because Ezekiel was in Babylon, but the Lord showed him, right, through a vision, the things that were going on in Jerusalem, the wickedness they were doing, the wickedness the priests were doing in the temple, outside the temple, the worshiping of the sun god, and all these weird, abominable things they were doing. And the Lord showed that to Ezekiel to say, this is why I'm going to bring this destruction that I'm going to bring. Okay, so that wasn't just an understatement about them transgressing very much. All right, there was a lot going on, a lot of wickedness going on in the land. And polluted the house of the Lord Yahweh, which he had hallowed in Jerusalem. And the Lord God of their fathers sent to them by his messengers, rising up betimes, meaning early, and sending, because he had compassion upon his people and on his dwelling place. But they mocked the messengers of God, and despised his words, and misused his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord Yahweh arose against his people, till there was no remedy. Okay, so they pretty much disregarded, the warnings. They, as it says, one example is Jeremiah. They put him in the stocks. What I'm saying? They try to kill him. Like they completely disregarded the warnings that he was bringing upon them from the Lord. And they just continued in wickedness till the Most High said, all right, at this point, there's no going back, bring the destruction. Therefore, he brought upon them the king of the Chaldees, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion upon young man or maiden, old man, or him that stooped for age. He gave them all into his hand. And the stoop for age is right, the older, like it says, the old men is just another way of saying that. And all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord Yahweh, and the treasures of the king and of all his princes, all these he brought to Babylon. Hence, Daniel the 5th chapter, you see that Belshazzar's crusty ass Babylonian lips, or really Assyrian lips, are drinking from the vessels of the Lord. Because this is how they ended up over there. And they burnt the house of God, which is the temple, and brake down the wall of Jerusalem, and burnt all the palaces thereof with fire, and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof. Keep in mind, at this point, the Edomites were helping them, right? It tells you that in the book of First Ezra, I believe the 4th chapter, how the Edomites partook in the burning of the temple. And in the book of Psalms, I think it's 137, it talks about that, how Esau, either that or Obadiah, how Esau said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof. The word raise means to destroy, right? To level. I think it's raise or race. There we go. Psalms 137 and 7. Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof. Okay. And that was talking about when the Babylonians were destroying Jerusalem. These guys were egging them on and helping them out. Verse 20. And them that had escaped from the sword, he carried away to Babylon, dealing with Israelites, where they were servants to him and his sons, until the reign of the kingdom of Persia. To fulfill and you can read about that in the book of Daniel, and a few of those other books that we covered around the time of the transition of the Babylonian Empire into the Medo-Persian Empire, or really the Persians mainly. To fulfill the word of the Lord Yahweh by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. In other words, when you read in the law, there is a land Sabbath, right? I think it's every 7th year or so. You're supposed to just leave the land, not farm, not harvest, not do any of that stuff. Just let the land rest. So by the Lord having Israel taken captive out of the land, or Judah in this case, um, the land was able to get that rest. Right? That's why it says, as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbaths, because there was nobody, like there wasn't like a nation of people on the land constantly tilling the land and so on. As it says, to fulfill 70 years, which is 70 years. Now this was like approximation, right? Because when you look at the length of the Babylonian Empire, it wasn't that long, right? I don't even think it came up to 70 years, But then again, you could look at it in the sense of how long it took before Israel, as a nation, fully returned. And then when I say as a nation, I mean mainly the Southern Kingdom back to the land, right? But more or less, it's still right around that same, time frame. Because there are times when the Most High gives a time or a date, but it's not an exact time or date. It's like an approximation. And then there are also other times in the scriptures where it's literally exactly to the second, to the millisecond. Verse 22, now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord Yahweh was spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord Yahweh stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, now keep in mind, so what we've gone through here so far is the Babylonians coming and taking captives, right? Exiling some Israelites, setting the Nebuchadnezzar setting up Zedekiah. Zedekiah rebels, Nebuchadnezzar sends his armies, and then they come and destroy Jerusalem. They end up taking the bulk of the Israelites captive to Babylon. And that's where we remain up until the Persians take down the Babylonians. That's all, as we're reading in here, that's all happened, right? The Persians took down the Babylonians, led by Cyrus, right? And then, of course, as we read in Daniel 5, he ends up giving that jurisdiction of the province of Babylon itself to Darius, right? Darius the Mede. And then now we're reading here, during that reign of Cyrus, right? The Persians are now in control. They're now the world superpower. He then gives us permission by the Spirit of the Lord to go back, to return back to Jerusalem, to build that temple, and so on. So wrapping it up in 2 Chronicles 36 and 23, thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth hath the Lord Yahweh, God of heaven, given me, and he hath charged me to build him an house in Jerusalem. The charge meaning he's given me a commandment, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? The Lord Yahweh his God be with him, and let him go up. So that was that decree to allow us to return back and then start the rebuilding of the temple, and then eventually the rebuilding of the walls, which was completed during the time of Nehemiah. Okay. So that pretty much wraps up the book of 2 Chronicles, right? We see a lot of history, particularly of, the kingdom of Judah, the back and forth with the northern kingdom, and ultimately what leads up to the Babylonian captivity there. So with that, Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Recha Kudash. And until next time, Shalom.